Thank you for joining me. Continuing the conversation about loneliness in over 50s. Being a public health concern, as I said before, there have been many flags that it has a physical impact. And as you heard from Dr. Yeneso, and I am zeroing in on this because you hear politicians whinging about how people won't get off their backsides and go and get a job and all these jobs that are unfilled. We now hear that chronic loneliness is one of the many reasons, it's complicated, many reasons people may not want to work. My next two guests are people at the forefront of talking about this sort of issue. Paul Farmer, who I know for many years, brilliant man. He's now CEO of Age UK. And Paul Goulden, who's at the International Longevity Centre's head of partnerships. They know each other, they work together, and they're going to join me now. So let me start with you. I've got you, Paul, up on the screen. People don't generally, and I haven't heard politicians talk about this, link physical health and loneliness, chronic loneliness, together. But they shouldn't they?
Oh, very much so. I think this really comes down to the heart of how we value each other and how we value people and how we value ourselves. So actually, that whole business of getting people into work, it isn't just about making sure that they are able to save for their pensions. It is around connecting with other people. So how we support people in both getting into work and when they're in work with their mental health is vital to keeping them there. And it is not just around the getting them into work for work's sake. It is about their housing, it's about their pensions, it is about their relationships. It has the knock-on effect all over. So mental health and work is a really key thing for governments to be focusing on.
Well, I want to come back to you more on that in just a moment. Let me come to Paul Farmer, CEO of Age UK. Paul, let's talk about hello. Lovely to see you again. Let's talk about loneliness in over 50s.
Yeah, hi, Trisha. Lovely to see you as well. I mean, I think we're increasingly understanding the scale of the issue amongst people over the age of 50 who are lonely, and also the impact that has on people. We know that people who are lonely, 9 out of 10 people who say they are lonely say they're unhappy and depressed. So as you say, there's that connection to your mental health, and that in turn has a knock-on effect to your physical health. And this kind of combination of factors is clearly having a detrimental effect at a whole number of levels. It's having a detrimental effect when it comes to thinking about people who want to work, as you've mentioned earlier, and Paul has said quite rightly as well. But we're also thinking about a much broader issue here about people's ability to connect, to be able to have the kind of life they want. And I think a lot of it comes back to, the kind of very slow progress that we've made since so many of the people in this age group were were effectively told to stay at home during the COVID period. And that kind of rebuilding of confidence, the rebuilding of that kind of capability is really challenging. Of course, people are more likely to lose their most precious partner during this period. And so that sense of isolation that is generated as a result of that is also an issue. So I don't think we should be surprised by the kind of challenge that this faces, but I think we do need to really look into it and challenge it.
Once upon a time, we looked at old age as sort of them and us. Most of us now we are the them, but it's Britain's as around the world. Our populations are, we've got more and more and more older people living longer. And yet services, and I'm going to come back to the other Paul in a moment, but like housing services right across the board don't seem to really cater for them, do they?
No, I don't think so. I think we have a real challenge about having almost denied the reality of the changing nature of our population. And it's a little bit like the work that you and I did several years ago around tackling mental health stigma. I think there is a stigma in our society around talking about later life, talking about the facts, the reality of what is going to happen to us. And so when you have that stigma, those conversations don't happen. can. And then as a result of that, both individually in terms of the effect that that has as your networks diminish, but also kind of in the wider societal terms, suddenly we start walking into this really troublesome space where our systems are not really designed to cater for people in their later life. And housing is a big issue. So too is thinking about work, but also thinking about connectedness, that ability to create really great, strong connections. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit later about some of those solutions, because it's not hopeless, I'm pleased to say, but there are some real challenges ahead if we're really going to get our government to, and governments around the world, this is not a uniquely British problem, how we get people to really think about this.
Let me come to the other Paul, and highlighting something that Paul at Age UK said. Housing, all of those. If we were to plan, I know this is very cruel of me. If one was to wave a magic wand and we were to have a politician actually sit up and listen, what sort of things in planning for things like accommodation, etc., should be done in order to recognise the fact that we are an ageing population? What sort of things should we be looking at?
So I think the first thing is, and Paul sort of alluded to this, we want government to be looking long term. So not just to 2030 in the next election or the next news cycle. We actually want governments to be thinking about a strategy for ageing. So Wales has a strategy for ageing. They have a commissioner for older people. They have a focus on what that demographic change is going to look like, and they're thinking about it. We don't have that in England or the UK as a whole. That would be a first ask. The second thing, and again, Paul sort of touched on this, let's look at this across the entire life course. So we want to be talking to people in their 20s now about what they think their housing might be like when they're in their 60s and 70s. It's perhaps a difficult conversation to have and engage with, but if we have that life course approach, it means that people can start thinking about this, because the danger if we don't do that is that in 30 years' time, probably other people than us will be having the same conversation about how we deal with housing in later life. So a key ask for government would be look forward for the next 30, 40, 50 years and look across the entire life course and think about us as people across our generations rather than segmenting in terms of what should we do for the 20s, what should we do for the 30s. I think those would be two key things that we want to look at.
Thank you. And just to finish off with you, Paul Farmer, you said there are solutions, and I had a quick look at the Age UK website, which is brilliant, actually. It's brilliant. It has got solutions like befriending services, transport, social activities, and you talked about connectivity, and it struck me that during the coronavirus, there would be many of the older population who couldn't even sort of link up by using technology. So you've actually got that on that IT training.
Yes, we have these amazing digital champion program right the way across the country that brings people together, volunteers supporting each other to learn how to use digital skills. We've got our telephone befriending service, which I think is a little bit of magic, just half an hour of a volunteer's time to spend half an hour every week with an older person. 5,000 people already do that. We desperately need more people to do that. And absolutely at a local level, our local partners running local befriending programs and schemes that help older people to connect with each other. So this is not a lost cause by any stretch of the imagination. We know that if we tackle the stigma, open up, create the services that are available, and also in some cities, places like Norwich, creating an age-friendly city where people feel much more comfortable being able to move around a city because there's the right public transport connections and the right kind of link. So this is all achievable, but it does need some will, and we're very much hoping the next government, as Paul has rightly says, will appoint an older people's minister to really address this, and also, of course, put the right kind of investment in to make sure that older people's support is achieved, because without that, I think in a decade or a generation's time, we will see some really big problems that far outweigh the issues that we're saying at the moment.
And to both of you, it struck me as I was talking to you, and Paul, again, you mentioned stigma. We look upon older people, when I think of some of the words, I get really ticked off when somebody just calls me dear. And I've noticed it now, probably because I'm older, that, I mean, it's not done cruelly, but there's a dismissive, there are so many stigmas around old age that somebody can't really understand what you're talking about. Dear and what have you, all of these sorts of things. And disabilities come into it as well, because you've got people who've been able-bodied for the vast majority of their life who are new to disabilities and all the issues that come with that. So, I mean, there is even around, dare I say it, and let me come back to you, Paul Goulden, around the language that we use around older people. Would I be right, or am I just getting touchy?
No, I think you're right, and I think one of the best things that ever happened. I used to work within the Age UK network, and one of the best things that happened was Age UK stopped using older people and started talking about later life. And I think that's Paul Farmer. I think that's still a phrase that's used, and I think that's just started chipping away at the stigma bit. I think some of the words. I don't think it just goes that way as well. I think how other generations refer to younger generations is unhelpful as well. So my plea would be let's pull the labels out of this and actually start looking at people as whole people across their lives. So say acknowledging that people in their 20s are going to get old, but acknowledging as well that if you think about people in later life, they're worried about housing, they're worried about their finances, they're worried about relationships and sex and all of this sort of stuff. It manifests itself in a different way, and the solutions are different, but we're all still human. So I think let's abandon the labels. Let's start talking about the issues and how they relate to people within the different generations and what can be done about it. And that, I think, will start to chip away. There is a stigma, there is ageism, and some of the adverts that are on television are absolutely appalling in the way that they look at, they categorize older people. But the more we call that out, but the more we actually talk about the issues that are common across the generations, rather than putting people in silos, that I think is a more positive way to go.
Absolutely. Thank you both for joining me. Just let me remind people, Paul Farmer mentioned befriending services. You could be one of those volunteers. So go on to Age UK's site and have a look at how you